Calls for Senate to reconvene heighten as acting President Oshibajo meets Senate leader.
Parliaments that are responsible and responsive will always take into account the national interest.
Taraba State Police Command recovers bodies of 7 drowned corps members.
Information and Culture Minister continues sensitization visits to media houses to solicit support for the ongoing national campaign against fake news.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall examine the fiscal responsibility and management of public funds.
Over the years, the federal government has put in place various strategies and promulgated laws to ensure prudent management of public funds.
Now, one such legislation is the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, which provides, among other things, for the monitoring, determination, and remittance of operating surplus for government corporations.
Now, Section 22 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 requires scheduled corporations or ministries, departments, and agencies to remit 80% of their surplus into the federal government consolidated revenue fund and keep 20% in their general reserve fund.
But there are reports that most of the scheduled corporations listed under the Act are avoiding declaration of a surplus on their audited financial statements.
And now, to ensure that agencies and corporations comply with the provisions of the Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission came up with the new operating surplus calculation template after receiving input from other stakeholders.
Now, the template, which was approved by the federal government, is set to be formally launched soon. So how will this enhance the prudent management of public funds? Pertinent question. And it's on that note, we'd like to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirian Umay. Good to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria, broadcast live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, here in Abuja, Nigeria's capital city. And as always, the complimentary part of the program shall be brought to you, which include a newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and entertainment news. Now, the morning news is right now with Miriam Akbata. Hello, Miriam.
Yeah, good morning, Kirian and Kingsley. Here is the morning news. I am Miriam Akbata. Unless the Senate reconvenes without further delay to complete the 2018 budgetary process, government may shut down in a matter of months. And this is owing to the fact that the capital component of what the government is receiving from the Federation account is not enough. This forms the focus of the meeting between the acting President Yemi Osinbajo and Senate leader Ahmed Lawa at the Presidential Villa, Abuja.
Responsible and responsive will always take into account the national interest, work assiduously to ensure that the country does not suffer. Here, in our case, we have our budget suffering. We are not able to implement anything today because we are not able to, as a legislature, the National Assembly, pass the request of Mr. President. So I believe that we should be on the same page with Nigerians.
In another development, the People's Democratic Party caucus at the House of Representatives has expressed concern over an alleged plot to reconvene the Senate to address urgent national issues. The PDP caucus, in a statement issued after a meeting in Abuja, says there may be an ulterior motive behind the call for the Senate to reconvene. The The statement signed by the House Deputy Minority Leader Representative Chukwuka Oyama urges those behind the move to act in line with laid-down rules, which states that the National Assembly may only be reconvened at an earlier date when leaders of political parties make a written representation to presiding officers, upon which the presiding officers may give notice to members to reconvene. The caucus pointed out that there has been no such notification to either the Senate President or the Speaker House of Representatives. Then a number of All Progressives Congress Party has continued to increase in Ebonyi State. This is because new members of high pedigree were formally received by the national chairman of the party, Adams Oshomole, in a mega rally in the state.
At all levels, including federal government and state government, must fulfill their obligation to protect lives and property, regardless of your ethnic origin, regardless of your religion, and regardless of your social class status. We resolved, we remain committed to those, and we continue to work for the people of Nigeria.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has continued his sensitization visits to media houses to drum up support for the ongoing national campaign against fake news. The minister was guest of the corporate headquarters of the authority newspaper in Abuja.
In Nigeria, fake news is aggravating conflicts, especially the farmers-herders clash. Purveyors of fake news are also exploiting the country's fault lines, using religion and ethnicity to divide the country.
Now to Judiciary Matters. The Chief Justice of Nigeria has called for greater financial accountability in the nation's judiciary as a way of stemming allegations of corruption in the third arm of government. He stated this in a message to the opening of this year's National Seminar for Financial Administration in the nation's judiciary.
Important to emphasize that corruption in all its forms and ramifications must be eschewed by you and officers under your supervision. As accounting officers, you are personally responsible for the public funds and property committed to your care.
On a sad note, Taraba State Police Command says it has recovered 7 bodies out of 9 youth corps members who recently drowned in one of the waterfalls of Mayoselbel town in Gashaka Legu government area. The police public relations officer, ASP David Messal, who confirmed the incident, said the command is making frantic efforts to recover the remaining 2 bodies.
Rescue operation, but unfortunately, before we could get to where they are, those who that were recovered were already dead.
We are hopeful that God will help us to recover these 2 missing corps members. I don't want to say their bodies right now because we are hopeful that they will be found alive.
Miners across the nation are to undergo training before benefiting from the federal government's financial assistance. To this end, the Federal Ministry of Mines and Steel Development is meeting with all state ministries of mines and mineral resources to chart a way forward in Abuja.
And we don't want to criminalize these people because we want to organize them. And for us to do that, we need to know from them exactly some of the challenges they are facing and the things we need to do to ensure that we have a smooth organization.
And finally, Nigerian traders in Ghana have been reassured that their lives and investments in Ghana are guaranteed, as the country will uphold its commitment to the ECOWAS protocol and other bilateral commitments with Nigeria. Ghanaian Minister of Foreign Affairs gave the reassurance when she met with Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister, Jeffrey Oyama.
That between Ghana and Nigeria, this should never be an issue, and we will not allow it to be an issue, and we're dealing with it. So I'm asking Nigerians to be calm. Between the 2 countries, there's nothing that cannot be resolved.
Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kirian and Kingsley after this break.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on NTA Network Service. And now to business. The insurance sector leads stocks in the equities market as experts say that stable policy will boost investors' confidence in other sectors. Details on business news with Joy Uzo.
Welcome to Business News. We'll start with the petroleum sector. Oil rose on Monday after Saudi crude production fell unexpectedly in July and U.S. drilling appeared to slow, although the price is still almost 10% below its 2018 high of more than $80 a barrel. And from the commodities market comes a report that the price of gold inched higher on Monday, extending their recovery from a 17-month low. Amid lingering worries over the U.S.-China trade conflict, while a stronger U.S. dollar capped the safe havens gains. Spot gold was up 0.2% at $1,215.71 an ounce, building on its 0.5% gain last week. U.S. gold futures were little changed at $1,223.7 an ounce. Now to the equities market. Bargaining hunt in the insurance stocks has made the Nigerian Stock Exchange Insurance Index to emerge the best performing indicator year to date. The continuing bear run in the stock market caused by exit of foreign investors and low demand by domestic investors had left market indices bleeding year to date. The NSE Insurance Index led with 4.2%, while the NSE Premium Index followed with a gain of 3.1%. A stockbroker spoke with NTA Business News on this development.
Their performance is reflected in the price, all right? And since they are 30 kobo, 20 kobo stocks, so if there's an increase of 1 kobo or 2 kobo, in fact, the percentage will be reasonable. And that is why you are seeing, when you are calculating the index for insurance companies, insurance sector companies, it looks as they perform they are the best performers in terms of index for the period. So people are now developing interest in purchasing insurance. So which means, of course, it has to reflect in their performance.
And to closing figures of trade for Monday, 6th August, the NSE All-Share Index depreciated 0.06% to close 36,479.42 basis points. Next is a graphic representation of the closing figures. With that, we'll wrap up business news. Many thanks for watching. I am Joy Uzo.
All right, thank you very much, Joy Uzo, for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria. Next for us now is a review of the headlines on the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
And now for us is newspaper review, and that's next. Well, Kinsley, we have a number of newspapers here, about 5 copies. Five copies, and most of which have political headlines.
That's right, on politics, but there are other follow-up stories. The lead story for all the papers that we have this morning focus on the recess by the National Assembly and efforts to get the Assembly members to reconvene. Let's begin with the Punch newspaper. Punch lead story says, Saraki, other National Assembly leaders hold emergency meeting today. With 2 riders, presidency fears shutdown, urges immediate resumption. Southeast senators blame Ndume for Ekuremadu's travail. For the Daily Sun newspaper, the headline is Saraki Dogara and INEC to reach compromise. Meet on 2019 elections budget, projects environment, non-assent to amended Electoral Act, and Oshibajo and Senate Majority Leader Pale. And for the Guardian newspaper, still on the National Assembly, the lead story says hope rises on 2019 polls budget as National Assembly leaders meet today. Oshibajo, Lawan hold talks on lawmakers.
Right, now let's turn to the Daily Independent, which also has that as the main headline. It says National Assembly recess may shut down government, says the presidency, with 5 riders. Mounts pressure on Saraki to reconvene Senate. Confirms Akpabio's defection to APC. National Assembly leadership holds emergency meeting today. INEC chairman appears before joint leadership. And EFCC plans arrest of Saraki Ekweremadu. And moving up to the New Telegraph main headline says the presidency, Nigeria risks total government shutdown with 2 riders. INEC chairman appears before Saraki Dogara over 242 billion naira budget. That's a budget for the elections. Now PDP, federal government blackmailing National Assembly, inducing senators.
Yeah, well, there are other stories, as we indicated, still on politics, majorly the booming season of the political gypsies who are drifting from one party to the other. Let's return to the Guardian newspaper. Second lead story for the Guardian says, below the photograph there, says disquiet in Akwa Ibom over Akpabio's planned defection to APC. The paper you were reading there said that he's already defected. Now, Deputy Governor of Akwa Ibom debunks rumor of resignation, and desertions by politicians can kill democracy. That's the story for the Guardian. And then on the first-hand left column of the paper, where you have a window of headlines for some news stories, it says, remain with APC. Jailed Joshua Dariye tells supporters. Joshua Dariye is the former governor of Plateau State who's been jailed for fraud. And then also there on the front page says PDP accuses presidency of blackmailing lawmakers over 242 billion naira 2019 polls fund. And INEC's deadline endangers 17 million prospective Nigerian voters. That's on page 5. There are other stories, as I said, on defection. Yes.
Yes. Well, what we have here is just other political stories on the Daily Independent. Apart from the main headline, we have, of course, you just read about the defection by former governor of Akwa Ibom, and he appeared here on the front page of the Daily Independent with Tinubu and other key members of the APC. That's Senator Akpabio. Now, besides that photograph, we have PDP reps accuse security operatives of plot to invade National Assembly, aid leadership change. And below that, have opposition using fake news to demarket Buhari. That's on page 5. This is coming from the federal government. Now, 845 Nigerian Airways ex-staff die 14 years after liquidation. That's on page 2. Well, that would be it for the new Daily Independent.
Okay, let me return to the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun newspaper, an earpiece beside the nameplate reads, 5 suicide bombers killed and 3 injured in Borno blast. Details on page 4. And also there on the front page, Southeast lawmakers spit fire over Ekweremadu. That's on page 11. Akpabio to join APC, that's what we've already read. APC dead in Kaduna, says Senator Hunkuye. That's on page 39. And 116 Nigerians in Libyan slave camps. That's according to the federal government. Now, the photograph on the front page of the Daily Sun, it shows the legendary Ray Ekpo, who clocked 70, and had a colloquium held in his honor yesterday in Lagos. Those are the photographs. Former External Affairs Minister, Professor Bolaji Akiyemi, Ray Ekpo himself, second left. You can see him with the checkered tie there. Former Governor of Akwa Ibom, Obong Victor Atta, the publisher of Vanguard newspaper, Sam Amuka, who is on the right. Kirian Reyepo is one of Nigeria's renowned journalists. In addition to celebrating his 70th birthday, he was also marking 45 years as a journalist. Yes, of course, he had worked with the Chronicle, but he hit the national limelight when he became editor of the Sunday Times. This was during the Second Republic. And one of the earliest incidents that he suffered when there was a fire at Necom House. Necom House used to be, and it still is, Nigeria's tallest building. It's right there on Marina, overlooking the Lagos House. It was set on fire. There was an arson attempt or something. And unfortunately, you know, Reyepo wrote an article which was considered incited, you know, to the commission of a crime. That was during the Shagari era. Exactly. And of course, he had to spend some time, you know, in the coolers. But of course, he then came out. But more importantly, 4 of them, himself, Dan Agbese, Yakubu Mohammed, and the late Delegewa, who unfortunately was killed by a parcel bomb in October 1986, they founded Newswatch magazine.
In fact, that was when he even came much more into the limelight in journalism, because the Newswatch then, you know, was known as one well-researched, that had well-researched writing pattern as at 1986, you know, downwards, you know, before, of course, the demise of the magazine.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, the magazine has gone under. But what Newswatch did when the 4 musketeers, as they were described, founded it, was to provide a response, as it were, to Time and Newsweek. Which were the very well-renowned global magazines. And they did quite well. But of course, other magazines also came out. There was Concord Weekly and then the African Guardian. And all that. Of course, Tell was founded by journalists who had worked with them at Newswatch. Let's take other stories.
Okay, now let's turn to the New Telegraph newspaper. Above the nameplate, DMO, federal government amasses 15.02 trillion treasury bills debt. And then just below the nameplate, we have some striking headlines there. The first is what the federal government says: defection won't stop prosecution of corrupt politicians. That's from federal government. Then INEC discovers 19 polling units in hotels, churches, and mosques. It's on page 3. And then impeachment threat forced my deputy out. Ganduje is the governor of Kano State. It's on page 4. Now, mass defection hits Oshu APC. It's also in the New Telegraph. And let's go down to below the photograph here. Where mother of 4 dies procuring abortion for pastor lover. Cleric must refund bride price, says the hobbyist family. It's on page 9 of the New Telegraph. Now, Kingsley, matters are rising.
Yeah, but that's just, we haven't touched on some of the other stories on the front page of the Punch. Let me just take them quickly, and then, because there are matters arising from some of the headlines. Above the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, Oshibajo mourns 9 drowned Taraba Corps members. That's on page 12. And by the way, the National Youth Service Corps has declared the 3 days of mourning for the corps members who drowned at the weekend in Taraba. Then you also have this headline there, two of them actually, on pages 4, 5, and 26. Woman fakes own kidnap, demands 15 million naira ransom from husband. And then new power policy will raise tariff by 14%. That's according to Discos. And defection remains silent despite persecution, showing cartels Autumn. And then right at the foot of the front page of the Punch newspaper, you have, of course, the photograph there showing scenes from the earthquake that struck Indonesia. And then right at the foot of the front page says, Lagos trader running from Scorpion falls into a 100-foot well. And Tanzania appoints Amonike as national team coach.
Yeah, let's begin with the National Youth Service Corps members that were drowned. Questions may arise as to what actually, led them to the waterfall, when perhaps nobody knows whether they also have a swimming experience, what led them there?
Well, the reports yesterday, when we first reviewed the papers yesterday, the reports indicated that the Corps members had gone on a picnic. One account said that they were on the river bank when suddenly the river burst its bank. Another said that they were swimming, And then suddenly, of course, the river got swollen, and then 9 of them got swept away, unfortunately. But there were some 22 of them who went on a picnic, so perhaps the other 13 who are surviving, once they recover from the shock, will be in a better position, yes, to indicate what happened.
Now,
Again, sympathies, yes.
This reconvening matter with respect to the INEC budget for the 2019 election, this reconvening, and I think so many opinions have actually come up to say that it's the right thing to do or it's not the right thing to do. Now, with also the issue of cross-carpeting that has been there, for weeks now, how would you think that are going to handle this issue of passing that budget, because it's already late in the day?
Well, I think there are some points to bear in mind. The first is that the leaders of the National Assembly are meeting today at 12 noon. And after their meeting, of course, they will also consult with INEC with regard to the appropriation, supplementary appropriation that has been submitted, and then some pending appointments that are also supposed to be ratified. But ordinarily, you would expect that the National Assembly would consider these matters that will be before. Consider doesn't mean that they're going to rubber stamp. And so for how long are they going to sit? Will they also share their number? That's right. And schedule it. And then they also how they handle their internal affairs, squabbles over leadership, and so on and so forth. But we are all here to monitor and report and analyze what's going on. But let's take a look at our editorial this morning.
Editorial. Now, the Patients' Bill of Rights Initiative, and of course, Good Morning Nigeria discussed this matter in greater details a couple of days ago. And what are the rights of a patient? Let's read this to you. In a bold move to ensure that patients' rights are no longer abused in the healthcare sector nationwide, the federal government recently unveiled the Patients' Bill of Rights Initiative. The vice president, rather the acting president now, Professor Emil Shebajo, who launched the program at the Presidential Villa, Abuja, said the Patients' Bill of Rights is synonymous to human lives and respect for human dignity. And I'll tell you a little story, Kingsley, just about, penultimate week. One of my neighbors had issues with her child under 5, and they was taken to a nearby hospital. But to our amazement, the officials there, who perhaps are not necessarily people from in the hierarchy of the hospital, those who are on night shift, they refused to administer any treatment on the child except something is paid. Is it part of what we're talking about? And we have to be called up around 1 a.m. to go and provide us professional assistance for them to begin to, render assistance to.
Unfortunately, Kyria, this is the experience that gets reported on a regular basis. And when we discussed the subject on Friday, we had a former president of the NMA who joined us from Kaduna, as well as the chief executive of the Consumer Protection Council. And these are issues that we will have to move away from, as a people who over time now will ensure that their rights as patients are respected. There's too much premium placed, on financial recompense, for treatment, go and obtain card, and so on and so forth. So it's a matter that is very significant, and we do hope that pressing on, with the rights will, of course, conduce ultimately to the welfare of patients. So that's the much that we can take. And by the way, there was a story we read about a fake kidnap by a woman who was trying to blackmail her husband. There is another story, we can't read that out now. This one happened in Ondo State. There was a group of kidnappers who tried to kidnap a pharmacist. They went to the store. Unfortunately, they couldn't get the pharmacist, who bolted through a back door. Now, one of the kidnappers was reported to have stumbled and fell. The police, of course, came to him and then picked him up. They discovered he had some 400 milligrams of tramadol in his pocket. The incident happened on Sunday. Up until yesterday, he was still asleep because of the effect of tramadol.
He will wake up. He will wake up and supply information.
Yeah, absolutely.
The striking one is the plan, the kidnapping by a lady against her husband is absurd.
Absolutely so. It's absolutely so. All right, Kieran, that's the most that we can take. Let's take a short break. When we return, we'll get into our principal item for conversation.
We thank you for staying with us up to this moment. And now to kickstart our discussion on the subject matter, which is fiscal responsibility and for management of public funds. We now join Oyemi Ajayi with this background report.
The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 was passed into law in 2007. to, among other objectives, protect against financial rascality and reckless spending by government. Section 22(1) of the Act states that, notwithstanding the provisions of any written law governing a corporation, each corporation shall establish a general reserve fund and shall allocate there at the end of each financial year 1/5 of its operation surplus for the year. Subsection 2 of the same section further says, the balance of the operating surplus shall be paid into the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the federal government not later than 1 month following the statutory deadline for publishing each corporation's accounts. Reports show that presently, there are 122 scheduled corporations listed under the Act, with more than 1.4 trillion naira so far remitted into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. But most of the scheduled corporations listed under the Act are said to be avoiding declaration of surplus on their audited financial statements. And as part of efforts to ensure standard practice, the Fiscal Responsibility Commission decided to draw up new templates for the determination of operating surpluses after receiving inputs from relevant stakeholders, and most of the initial 31 scheduled corporations, including the Budget Office of the Federation, Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, and a host of others. So what is the level of compliance with the Fiscal Responsibility Act? What is the new template seeking to achieve now? What are the challenges to implementing the Act? What should be done going forward to ensure that the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act are fully complied? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be answering these questions and others shortly.
All right, thank you very much, Oyemi Ajayi, for that background report. Now, here with us in the studios, we have 3 guests to discuss this issue. First, we'd like to welcome Mr. Victor Muruako. He's the acting chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Mr. Muruako, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
All right. Also here with us, another familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria, Professor Ken Ife is a macroeconomic policy analyst. Professor Ife, pleasure that you're back.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning.
And we also would like to introduce Eze Onyebere. He's a lead director Center for Social Justice. We're also glad to have you this morning on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure.
Yeah, gentlemen, you're all welcome. And to kickstart this conversation, it will be necessary for us to enlighten our viewers on what fiscal responsibility is all about. And I would like to ask Professor Ife to lead us here.
Well, anybody who remembered what happened to Nigeria in 2005 would greatly appreciate Fiscal Responsibility Act. The reporter described it as financial recklessness and financial rascality. I think those are very kind words. There was confusion in this land. Nobody knew how much we were owing. People were borrowing left, right, and center. And the country was sinking. Eventually, we had to get bailout of over $18 billion. But now, with 2007 Fiscal Responsibility Act, came a desire to instill confidence in the economy, to bring transparency to the doorstep. In fact, the whole public finance management has come under scrutiny, and there was no escape. Virtually, most MDAs are involved in one way or the other. They are affected. But we now have a commission, and it's not just at the federal level, but also at the state level, and that is what the beauty of this. In fact, if you want to borrow money externally, or if you want to go and quote in the stock market, you will not escape having to implement FRA, so they call it, and then have a commission. So it permeates the whole country, fabric. And I tell you, what has happened that has brought us here today is an essential milestone in the fiscal management of this country's economy. And I really look forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks a lot. Mr. Oyekpere, what's your take on this? Fiscal responsibility, I'm sure Nigerians keep hearing about fiscal responsibility and its many provisions, but what does it mean?
Well, I think it's the most wonderful piece of legislation we've ever had in Nigeria, from my own perspective. Fiscal responsibility to me means that we have an evidence-led scientific system of managing our resources, particularly the budgetary resources, from preparation up to the time you do the implementation, up to the time you do the final audit. So it opens up the system, introduces more transparency and accountability so that the government, which is a representative of the people, can report more and can become more accountable to the people. And in terms of borrowing, we are now having a situation where the law says you can only borrow for capital expenditure, okay? You borrow for projects and purposes that can regenerate so that you'll be able to pay back in the future. So in essence, from the preparation of the budget where you have the medium-term expenditure framework, up to the approval, up to capital budget implementation and reporting, up to monitoring and evaluation, up to debt sustainability, we have a new raft of laws and policies which guides and says this is how you do it, this is how you report to the people, and this is how you have reporting between the agencies of government, between the executive and the legislature.
All right, I'm just wondering, is this just a question of dealing with the letter of the law rather than with the spirit? Because a decade or more later, there are still questions with the budgeting process, with the implementation of various budgets, and the fact that our national condition doesn't appear any much better than it was. So the aspect of indebtedness, of course, has been taken care of. How much does this mean to you as a commission, Mr. Morocco?
Well, thank you. Looking at the law, and as the operators of the Act, Fiscal Responsibility Act number 31 of 2007, it's good we appreciate that the Commission was came into force in December 2008. By December this year, we'll be inching to 10 years, a decade of operation. I can tell you not just the letters of the law, but the spirit and the practical aspect of it have been is being implemented. I can tell you frankly that it's not yet Uhuru. In the national fiscal life of Nigeria, there have been a lot of improvement. Just like the background report stated it, you have to look at what it used to be before and what it is presently, and also the hope, the efforts that are being made. You can agree with me, you can call with me that a lot of efforts have been made. For instance, what was it like before? What was the budget life was? You recall that before it used to be that the president or the head of state would just come on television on either 31st December of each year to come and announce what is said to be the national budget. The same thing happens in the states, just like that. But you see, because of the need, the urgent need to introduce, prudence and accountability, and in discharge of that mandate under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Commission have tried in its efforts to come about to implement the law by ensuring that all the major players abide by the spirit of the law. Obviously, you can agree with me that before this time, the issue of medium-term expenditure framework was never there. But now, it's an issue. You also have to agree with me that the issue of benchmark, commodity price, will have to be agreed upon between the executive and the legislature, and it will be passed first before the budget estimate to be taken. You see, we are moving on. A lot of progress have been made, but we are not yet there, and we need to get there faster, because in modern day time, any nation, particularly in their national appropriation life, that does not take fiscal responsibility very seriously will obviously run into a big storm. And I think having weathered the storm of the past, of the pre-2004, 2005, and 2000, that period, we don't need to get back there. We need to find a way and get our ass quickly and get ready.
Now part of the content of that act is to instill financial transparency in the funds management and across board in the country. And when Onyekbere was speaking, he talked about scientific management of our resources. Now, how efficacious has this been? As you're managing the commission, how efficacious has this been? How much of this responsibility has been injected into the operational framework of the MDAs and the corporation and what have you?
Well, just like you said, the Act provides for prudent management of the natural resources. So, what do you do in that? looking at where we're coming from, we are already used to bad habits in the past. Before this time, there was nothing like medium-term expenditure framework. People are now compelled to try to see how the budget can be based on needs. Before this time, there was nothing like medium-term sectoral strategies, which will have to be implemented, which will have to come into play now in articulation of the needs. If you remember, before this time, federal government made efforts under the military regime to bring in the needs as one of the framework for, but it didn't work. Now it's guided by an act. It's not been easy. Looking at our old habits is still a battle, which we are still struggling. Because you find a situation whereby even in terms of borrowing, you find out that a lot of state government will find it difficult to comply with the provisions of the act. They find it more convenient to see how to circumvent it. You know, there have been several attempts to whittle down the commission in the past. But we thank the present government that is trying to give strength to the commission, which is part of why we're coming out to say we can go beyond what we used to do. We can develop templates for calculation of operating surplus. We can even develop, we're working on template for the national medium-term expenditure framework, so that there will no more be questions as to whether you're complying or not. We have to come on scientifically based, and we can measure the indices, the level of compliance and performance. So far, so good. It's not been that bad. But we are not yet there. We need to work harder.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Morocco. Professor Ken, if the one question to also ask is, look, are we now more fiscally responsible? And what does this then mean in terms of a trickle-down effect for our national well-being?
I think we are moving forward in the sense that, besides accountability and transparency factor, there are other core objectives, which is to maintain macroeconomic stability, and then also to ensure that there is economic sustainability. And how do you get that? You get that through the regime of a medium-term fiscal framework, which means in a 3-year frame, they want to bring all the key macroeconomic indices into the calculus. So CBN takes a cue from there. The Debt Management Office takes a cue. They now have what Chief Eze talked about, as we want to have predictability. We want to know what is the scientific basis for what we want to achieve in the next 3 years. Put it all down. And that means you're going to be looking at the two sides of the balance sheet. What are the revenue issues? How the generated revenues? You have projections of those, and they have to be robust, scientific, evidence-based projections. And then you turn on the other side of the balance sheet. What are the revenue? What are the expectations on the spend, on the revenue? And then you have to have a way of accounting. And that's what they have done by putting a template that says, if you want to spend anyhow, do what you want to do, we're going to wrestle you down because we have a template that you have to follow. If you veer off this template, when we are doing our accounting, when we are reconciling, we'll throw all that out and then make you pay 80% of what. So you can go ahead and spend money, but you will account for it. Because when the audit comes and they follow the template, you find out most of the things that you have spent your money on have been added back. And then you're either going to, but I think they need to look at the punitive side of it, how enforcement and the punitive side, because that is where the devil lies. The devil lies in that detail. How do you punish officers that are going to continue to take us off track? Because that is inevitable.
All right,
Quickly, you know, from what Prof has said, you know, it does seem that enforcement is actually a key to the achievement of this. But I'd like to ask Ezonyekwere, with respect to the new template, you know, that's being speculated now, I'm not sure it's been launched, do you think that there is a necessity for a new template? Of course, the Act has been established, so is there a need for a new template for surplus calculation? Yes, you know, for the operational, perhaps as a kind of operational methodology for this?
Very well. When you talk of a new template, that means there was an existing template. I don't think there was an existing template what they have just done is to bring out for the first time a template for the operationalization of the provisions of the Act that talks about operating surplus. The Act simply talks about operating surplus without defining how it should be calculated. So what this has done is to say these are the procedures for calculation of operating surplus. You have to follow the accounting system prescribed by the Auditor General of the Federation. You have to do things in accordance with the regulations issued by the Accountant General of the Federation. This is more how much you have to pay. These costs are allowable before you do your operating surplus. These costs are not allowable. So essentially, this is a very wonderful instrument that the Fiscal Responsibility Commission has come up with. But like Prof said, what we now need to think is that some agencies or some people leading some of these corporations may decide not to abide by this. If they run foul of it, how do we sanction them to make sure that we set a good example for everybody to follow? So that's a critical challenge, and I think that question is before the National Assembly and the authorities to look at how we can make this more practicable. Because if you ask me, if the provisions of the operating surplus template are properly adhered to, meticulously followed, we may have a situation where the bulk of the borrowing we are doing may have to be cut short, because we could possibly have a situation where we have between 1.5 to 2 trillion naira coming from these scheduled corporations as the operating surplus. So instead of looking for where to fund the deficit, monies that come to Treasury, this could be used instead of going a borrowing or going cap in hand to other sources.
Well, Eze, you just touched on one very significant point, I mean, like the other guest, with regard to establishing the connection among some of the points that you've talked about with regard to the role of fiscal responsibility in economic management. Here now you said a new template is about to be launched with respect to operating surpluses for MDAs, that's to say ministries, departments and agencies of government that deal with revenue issues. Earlier we were talking about the budgeting process, MTEF, and then we also were talking about borrowing. So what is the connection involving the new template for operating surplus, the MTEF, and then, the cap or restraints, or if you like, parameters for borrowing? The acting chairman.
Very well, thank you. You see, the template for calculation, just like he stated, there was no template. The Act just provided for payment of 80% operating surplus by all scheduled corporation. And it's important we appreciate what a scheduled corporation means. A scheduled corporation is those corporations under the Act, brought in part of the Act. Originally, they were 31, but now it's been increased to 122. And I sincerely believe, the operators, FRC, the Commission, will believe that there is urgent need to increase the numbers of the corporations under it. It's very important because almost all the agencies of government, about 490-something of them, they earn one revenue head or the other. Will be making case for increase of the scheduled corporation under the Act so that we can bring in money. That is the connection is, first and foremost, in development of your MTEF, your medium-term expenditure framework, is expected that you make projections both for your revenue and your expenditure. It's not like it's just all about expenditure framework. It should also include your revenue generation capacity. It is also expected that you'll be able to state how much, project how much that will be expected from you at the end of your financial year. How it works is, by the time you submit your MTEF, and it will be looked at, then after each financial year, then you will submit to the Commission, and of course to other statutory bodies like the Office of the Auditor General, Accountant General, and maybe the National Assembly. You submit your end of year financial statement, your audited account, which we'll go through. We'll look at it and cross-check some of the facts, whether it worked the way it should be. By the time our experts will be looking into your document, we will now find out whether what you're supposed to pay is what you have paid. If, just like Prof stated, if there are issues, some expenditures are not allowed, some are allowable. If we find any conflict in it, what we'll do, we'll return it and you have to pay. And you now have to pay from your 20%. I experienced
20% retention.
Yes. You have to create a general reserve fund for that 20%. Why you pay 80%, not to fiscal responsibility, to the consolidated revenue funds of the federal government. The nexus with borrowing is, if these agencies, if they keep to terms to ensure that they perform their obligations under the Act, there will be more funds for the federal government to use in discharge of its mandate to the people.
All right, Professor, if you want to add to explaining this nexus amongst the three heads.
You know what it's like is we lose tremendous amount of money from those recklessness. Take TSA, for example, Treasury single account. Government was giving money to banks, not charging interest, and going back to borrow back money at 15% or more interest. I mean, how reckless can you be? So, and the government doesn't know where it has extra money or not. So, but in a single account now, you can actually every day, every hour, see what your balances are. And then you decide whether or not to resort to the borrowing you have planned or just use the surplus that you are generating. And the same thing comes to an MDA that is submitting its papers. We're going to look at, you said this is your borrowing requirement, but you can't actually justify that from the science of your revenue accounting. Then we look at how you plan to, what you have planned to get in. You couldn't justify that. So they begin to see the criticism, oh no, you wanted to borrow more than you require. As a matter of fact, if you have operated your account correctly, you didn't even need to borrow that money. So, and then the recklessness is they are spending without authority. They are overspending on the budget. They're giving more people money to go abroad when they shouldn't have. And then they're giving ministers and, they're over the more, and some of those are going to fall foul of the law. So the FRC will eventually come and make recommendations and take it to the Office of the Attorney General to prosecute, where they can't even finish. If their 20% is not enough to pay for that, there are also issues of violation of the law. So they are going to be open to the prosecution. So this is... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that it's a minefield, and it all goes well for financial management. And but we need to see, as I said, the devil is in the implementation. It's like corruption. Corruption is practiced everywhere in every economy. The difference is that in the West and in the US, if you get caught, what happens? You'll be shredded like vegetable. But here, when you get caught, they'll celebrate you. They celebrate you for stealing billions of naira.
Yeah, Professor Kenife and Kyria, I would like Eze to also speak to these linkages that we're trying to establish. One other leg has popped up, and I was going to ask that question. Professor Kenife has brought in the TSA. Here we are, there's been some explanation further as to how you can link the operating surplus, management of your operating surplus, to debt management, to MTEF, and TSA. Now, if you had a TSA, and the whole idea of TSA was for government to have, at a glance, a look at its balance sheet or its, if you like, its bottom line. But why would there then be a need for this operating surplus guideline or operating surplus template?
Well,
I don't know whether my question is clear.
Yes. Okay. These are statutory corporations. In the first place, government invested in them and brought the money for which they were started. If they're private companies, they have to pay dividends or scrip shares to their owners. So when they finish whatever they're doing, whether it's trading on a service, they are bound to return whatever should be the profits to the federal government, and at the same time keep some in the reserve to be able to continue whatever business they're doing. Now, the whole idea is that some of them, despite the fact that you have TSA, you still have to do your accounting at the end of the year to determine whether you ran at a profit or not necessarily profit or loss, to determine what exactly you got and what you didn't get, so that you now know what gets to the government. Even if the money is in the TSA, it's not the whole money there that belongs to the treasury. So you know demarcate what belongs to the government and what belongs to the corporation. But then if you are asking this question about the link, it's like a chain. It's like a bicycle's chain. So the starting point of it is that at the end of the year, you are going to plan to say, this is the budget, this is the expenditure, this is the revenue. So in terms of revenue, if this money is coming as operating surplus, you are going to use it to do your revenue projection. And then you do everything in such a way and manner that the variance between your projections wouldn't be so wide, so that you don't budget and then you wouldn't have money at the end of the day to spend. And then if you come to the debt issue, I've already mentioned it, that if more of this money is coming, the need to borrow will be less. And then if you're also borrowing, you borrow in a way and manner that is sustainable, so that you can be able to pay in the future at the time of repayment. And that debt should be such that should help the economy to regenerate, create jobs, add value, ensure that the ease of doing business, that that you can do business more easily. Companies, when they hire, people will pay taxes, they make more profit, then they pay back more corporate tax to the government. And then at the end of the day, when you publish the accounts, the capital budget implementation reports, you are building more confidence in the people. People are seeing where their money is going. So that's, say pay more taxes. People will now be willing to pay because they see their money is well spent. They also know that nobody is doing any backhand deal. So it's like a chain, a very complete one. From the time you are planning the budget, up till the time of implementation, up till the time of borrowing, up till the time of reporting. Ideally, this should build more confidence in government from the citizens, if it is very well implemented.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so far for your submissions. But from your explanation, the overall explanations of our three girls, it does appear that there are possibilities of discrepancies, in the entire process because of the complex nature of financial management overall. And now looking at keeping to terms, and that's where I will now go to the man in charge, that's Victor Moraco. Now, keeping to terms has become difficult from what we have gathered. Now, how do you ensure enforcement, which of course Professor Ife raised earlier on?
Yes, enforcement of not just the operating surplus template. Enforcing provisions of the Act have been very challenging. The Commission, we've devised means of ensuring that we'll carry on and do our optimum best given the situation, because this is an Act that had clear provisions of violations, offenses, without providing for sanctions. There are obvious challenges. For instance, let's look at what it used to be. What it used to be is that most of these MDAs, before, they will produce different accounts. One to us, the Commission, and one maybe they take out to other offices like the Auditor General and all that. When we discovered this, we had to engage them. Sometimes also they subsume profits and declare them as losses. By the time we go into the nitty-gritty of the details of their financial statement, we discover that we engage them. We tell them, look at what they did. Sometimes we form committees to resolve this. But at other times when we cannot resolve, we have to take it out somewhere. The challenge ordinarily should be when any agency or operator of an agency is found culpable, ordinarily the due process of the law should take place. There should be clear offense. There should be clear punishment if there's an offense. However, the Act stated that the best we can do is to do a report to the Office of the Attorney General. This has been a very big challenge, even with the template which is just coming into being. But it's also important that we state that this template have been in circulation. It's been approved by the federal government since November 2016. But we've come up with it. We had to organize training. We had to take it to the public and launch it. Because when we finished it with the stakeholders, we took it to the federal government, which also engaged other stakeholders, particularly the Office of the Accountant General and the Office of the Budget Office of Federation. After going through it, was finally approved in a Treasury circular. But we are now taking it out public, and we're going to organize different training so that the operators, particularly the financial experts in this 122 MDS and even more, will get used to, because we have had a lot of issues, conflicts, and we had to set up too many companies. We want these things to be clearly written. So our key challenge in terms of operating the Act and even the template for calculation of operating is obviously the failure of the Act to provide for sanctions for any default.
Well, in addition to what you just indicated, I'm wondering, because aspects of what will be required of the MDAs will be financial forecasting. Will your training going forward involve, getting the right kind of experts who work in these MDAs to be in a better position to forecast their finances in any given year? If these are just, sometimes with the greatest respect to them, if it's just going beyond mere bookkeeping, to say this is our expected income, this is our expected, this is our projected expenditure.
Very well, you're right. But you see, just like I've told you, a lot of progress have been made. Before, you could just call it mere forecasting. But we'll come back. You can even give it to the federal government. In anticipation of some of these laxities, at a point, the then Honorable Minister for Finance released a Treasury circular that says you should pay in advance 25% of your gross income. That was being operated to checkmate the issue of just mere forecasting of your revenue. What happens in that situation is that you have to pay in advance. At the end of the financial year, by the time you submit, you get your financial statement, we'll now cross-check what you've already paid, 25% of gross revenue, and what is supposed to be your 80% of operating supplement, will now deduct. If you have a balance, you now have to pay to the consolidated revenue, but the balance. So that has been taken care of also. That it will be most difficult now for agencies. The only key area we have challenges is the issue of sanction. It's a very big challenge, and that is why we've used every opportunity to call on the National Assembly to complete the amendment of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. That's an act in the last house during the 7th Assembly. It got to the committee stage. As we are speaking now, we started all over again with submission from the presidency and even a lot of private members. The amendment bill is before the National Assembly. It's gone to the committee. There is need to complete that act so that there will be clear sanctions for violations.
Now, Kingsley, I think there's a little difficulty here, if I understand all the submissions so far. Now, the Act did not make provision for enforcement or even a sanction for erring agencies. And I would like to ask Professor Ife, what does this portend, for this fiscal responsibility operational framework? Because if you cannot enforce, there's no sanction. Now, how do you ensure probity? How do you ensure transparency and compliance?
That's correct. Now, what I'll still say is with a pinch of salt. You can still have the full legal provisions for sanctions, and yet you still have issue on enforcement of those. You know how many governors have been with EFCC for the last 15 years, 10 years? How many have been convicted? So there's also an issue about our law and how we enforce things. But I need to tell you two things that need to be on the table. One is naming and shaming, because it's important that you publish these reports after your audit. Publish it bring it to the public domain. Then you open them to naming and shaming, because they can take the pressure. When the likes of SS, NGOs, and all of that, come down like a ton of bricks on an MDA, they've had it. The second one, of course, is what he has mentioned: capacity building. You really need to build capacity. Don't assume people have the capacity. They haven't got the capacity. Because you think that they were all employed because they were very competent, that the occupants of these positions are that's not the truth. You have to build capacity on projecting on, if you look at, let me give an example. If you look at the procurement people, you now have procurement officers in key MDAs. You now have a lot of meetings to share knowledge, to bring them up to speed. Is that kind of thing. You have all internal auditors you may have in each of these MDAs. You have to train them. Then you have to make sure that in the planning side of the MDAs, they're all on speed on the planning and forecasting and projections. and then looking at what they have done before, and you take them through that. Then secondly, on the revenue side and on the internal audit side, you need to roll out the resources so that you close the gap, rather than come and get me and sit back and then think about how you're going to punish somebody. You have to take them through that long haul.
There was always the lingering suspicion that some MDAs at all levels of government tended to have operated like fiefdoms on their own, with very little restraint. How can the system, be made more transparent and therefore more accountable on the basis of this template that we're talking about? Because I ask again, financial forecasting, it can be a major challenge rather than just straight line bookkeeping. What is it that is required to pierce the veil that a number of these MDAs are often thrown around their operations?
Well, like if you take a good look at the template, it is quite clear on things that have to be taken into consideration when you are calculating the operating surplus. And also it's clear on those items that you don't have to take into consideration. So a meticulous implementation of these provisions, first of all, by building capacity, as Prof has said, go around these corporations and tell them, say, this is the regulations. These are the things that are acceptable, these are the things that are not acceptable, so that you don't plead ignorance, although ignorance cannot be an excuse in the law. And so when you do this, and then you also meticulously follow through the template in terms of when they bring their accounts and documents, you review it properly and follow up with them. I don't even want to believe that the issue of sanctions should be the beginning and the end. I was somehow following this bill by the time it was even in the National Assembly. They had tried to model it on the Brazilian law. There were sanctions for political office holders, which could even mean some of them not holding political office for a period of time. The political office holders ganged up and said, no, this is too harsh, we don't want this. They now place the sanctions on the permanent secretaries and accounting officers. The accounting officers also came together and said, no. We serve at the pen, we must obey the political heads at the pen of losing our jobs or being sanctioned. So how can you place the burden on me when somebody is to give me instructions on what to do? So at the end of the day, the sanctions were totally removed. And that's why the Fiscal Responsibility Commission and other stakeholders are saying, bring back those sanctions so that let punishment follow a violation of the law. But like the prof said, even the issue of publishing, NATI is doing that perfectly well. NATI has not sanctioned anybody, particularly, the big heavyweights in the oil industry. But they have tons and tons of publications. They've gone to the media to say, this corporation has done this corporation has done that. They've engaged the media, they've engaged civil society. Then the National Assembly picks these things up with all manners of public hearings. Let it be in the public domain so that even years later, somebody can say, no, this was done. At a time when you have the strong political will, somebody can now call others to account and take it off from there.
Just before we'll bring in again the acting chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Gentlemen, I mean, it would appear that perhaps part of what we are talking about here has to do with auditing. Is there a conflict in the roles of the Auditor General of the Federation or of the state, but in this case we're discussing the Federation, Auditor General of the Federation, and then the Fiscal Responsibility Commission? Is there any conflict here?
There is no conflict to the best of my knowledge. The Auditor General looks at clearly the financial and process issues and the compliance issues. But let's recall that the Auditor General does not audit most of these scheduled corporations. Okay? So most of these scheduled corporations, by my understanding through the Constitution, appoint their own auditors. And they look at their books generally. They are not calculating the operating surplus. Although I may agree that the audit report from the Auditor General, if it is timely, may also help in this calculation of the operating surplus, because I've seen the Auditor General talk about agencies going outside their mandate to spend money. Okay, you spend money that is not cognizable under the act setting you up. So that means that kind of money you are spending may not even be among the expenses you are allowed to deduct in the calculation of your operating surplus. So I see some level of collaboration, but they are not conflicting. They can all do their own works respectively.
Acting Chair, what's your response to that?
It's obviously clear that there is no conflict. the Office of the Auditor General, their function is clearly provided in the Constitution. It's not in tandem. It's not the same thing like that of the fiscal, which is a statutory body set up by the Act of the Parliament, particularly number 31 of FRA 2007. Our function is very clear, particularly on the area of monitoring of federal government projects, then on the issue of payment of operating surplus, and then ensuring that the debt sustainability to a certain level. Although coming to that aspect also, there's also a challenge because the provisions of the acts need to be complied with by providing the necessary tool for the states and the other tiers of government to ensure that they comply with provisions of the act, particularly section 42 of the FRA. I don't see, as the chief operator of the commission for now, I don't see we've rather been cooperating and we've been complementing each other. Sometimes we seek for reports from the Office of Auditor General. And talking about naming and shaming, we have used this tool to a large extent. You see, that is the only thing we have. And also, we've also tried to engage. What we do first is we engage. Because most of these MDAs are all, you know, you have to be cautious of interagency relationship so that you don't upset the applicant. You have to be very careful about it. So what we do first is we engage them, what we call stakeholders meeting. If we find an infringement, we invite the organization and just make it clear to them. Most times they've agreed and they now have to make up. A lot of them are still paying up for what even they are supposed to have paid about 3, 4, 5 years. And we're still urging them. We'll keep nudging them on. We will find an extreme situation where we report like some...
All right, let me ask this question again, Kyrian. You know, we've talked about now your interaction with the Auditor General's office. Now, what is also your interaction with due process? That's to say the Bureau of Public Procurement. And what is also your interaction with the Debt Management Office? Because part of what goes out in the public domain is that some of the agencies go a borrowing, as Professor Kenike has also indicated. And then, of course, some of them will get their clearance from the DMO. Does the DMO revert to you to say, hey, listen, this is the template that these guys are likely to be in breach of, or these are the guidelines that are likely to be in breach of? They go to Bureau of Public Procurement to go and obtain, if that is, if they made a requirement, a certificate of no objection. How do you link up all of these government entities to ensure that in the end, the overall objective of fiscal responsibility and prudent management of public funds is achieved?
I can tell you, I can assure you that we have a robust relationship both with the BPP and even the Office of DMO. They usually, DMO submits their report to us and we work with their reports most times. Like when we come out publicly to make a statement on any state, like if you recall about last year we made statement on about 5 states, and this year we made statement about 3 states on their debt sustainability level. All that we normally act based on the report of the DMO. We have a very robust relationship, but I know that that can be further strengthened because we need to tie up. We need to tie up because our conviction is that federal government does not really need to borrow if we can block all these loopholes. And that is why what the present government is doing by encouraging the commission to come out and do more. And we are very encouraged and we're going to do more.
All right, thank you indeed, Victor Omorakol, the acting chairman, Fiscal Responsibility Commission. Also, thanks to Professor Kenny Fair, our analyst, and of course, Eze Onyebere. We are still on Good Morning Nigeria for this Tuesday. We're going to take a short break. You know, when we return, we're going to, of course, delve into other intricacies in our conversation. But before we do that, there is an information just reaching us that the National Assembly had been cordoned off by the security operatives. The reasons not yet known to us, but we'll keep you posted, you know, as time goes on. For now, let's take a short break. When we return, we'll continue with the, of course, the rest of Good Morning Nigeria for today. Do stay with us.
All right, let's say Good Morning Nigeria. We're reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Just before we went on the short break, we've been discussing with our guests on the fiscal responsibility and prudent management of public resources. We have some tweets now. We'll quickly take those tweets and then return to our guests. Festus Akimboyewa has this tweet. Fiscal responsibility and management of public funds have increased the credibility of the government. And government at all levels still have a lot to do to uphold standards of public admin and maintaining public trust.
All right, now from Aminu Haliru, he says that the Act of Fiscal Responsibility and Management of Public Finance 2007 is a welcome idea, especially in our budgetary expenditures. But unfortunately, up to this moment, some corrupt state governors are not respecting the Act.
And this is from a handle, DW. It says, I just hope it helps. Even with single treasury accounts, people are still dealing with government resources. All right, so these are the two or three tweets that we are taking very quickly. Let's return to Professor Kenife. Professor Kenife, again, for purposes of explanation, and as when we are discussing issues pertaining to the budget, we have always had you as guests on the program. There was always a dissonance recognized by you experts with regard to sometimes what the federal government was doing and then what the subnational governments were also doing. MTEP, for instance, and so on and so forth. The federal government, while it's preparing its own budget and parameters for those budgets, some state governments we have seen, table their appropriation bills before their respective state houses of assembly, and sometimes, within a matter of hours or just a couple of days, they railroad those bills through, and then they get whatever they want. In the meantime, the national parameters, still have not been settled, as it were, by the National Assembly. With regard to fiscal responsibility, how much of a challenge do the subnational governments pose to the full realization of the intent of the Act?
No, actually, the FRC, the fiscal responsibility, sits in the nexus between the states and federal. And whilst governors can rush things through, there are certain things they can't do without going through FRS. For example, if a governor wants to borrow external money, federal government has to agree to this. If you want to go and raise bond to finance a project, federal government has to come to it. So you now find out that DMO office is going to have to interact with you. They're going to do fiscal, you come through them. They first do part of their due diligence is, have you passed the fiscal responsibility at your state? Yes. Have you set up the commission at your state? Yes. You implement. You're going to have to pass through all that, and they monitor you against those. So that is where this is a fulcrum. They can go beyond not connecting with this. But I want to say something though. I talked about the system of naming and shaming. But there's also another thing that we should bear in mind, and that is some of the informal pressures come from, a system of recognition, award, appreciate somebody that has achieved and done something that is positive. When will you publish an example of a very successful MDA that has done it and is very nice? Let people say it. Because people are also encouraged by good example. Just in the same way as you are bringing international template well accepted and trying to bring it into the system at various, try and find one person that has done it well and then promote that. Give an award. Find one or two states, give them an award. Find one or two MDAs, give them an award, and others will feel, okay, this is how it actually ought to be done. So beyond capacity building, closing gaps, appreciate, recognize. So they all go together. And of course, you have nothing to worry about on the shaming and shaming, because you already have Freedom of Information Act behind you. So, you can put that out.
All right. Kisly, that's a question I'd like Mr. Morocco to actually answer. And that is coming from one of the tweets that we received this morning. And it has to do with the states, which, of course, you actually raised. Now, how much of compliance, are you getting from the state government with respect to the 2007 Fiscal Responsibility Act?
Well, it's very important to appreciate that we are running one economy, both the federal state and local government, there is need for macroeconomic stability of the nation. Anything happening at the local government or state, any instability will obviously affect the national macroeconomic stability. So it is one economy. So there is a serious nexus. We are having serious challenges with most states in compliance. But it's good we appreciate the area, the jurisdiction of the Act. The Act does not apply to the state except to the issue of debts and borrowing, indebtedness. It's important to appreciate that Fiscal Responsibility Act is just like a federal law. The only area that we have jurisdiction in the sub-regional government is only the issue of loan and borrowings. So even at that area, we're having challenges. What the Act provided for us to do is to assist the states to buy into, to adopt. And we have tried as much as we can to do that by also encouraging states, by carrying out enlightenment program workshops, bringing in the states through the office of either the Minister of Finance or their budget office or Minister of Planning in all the states. But you find out, obviously, the unwillingness of most governors to buy into it. Even the ones that have been compelled by the federal government through the 22 conditions, the fiscal sustainability plan, which the federal government came out before they can assess the bailout and all those and all that. You find out that is being operated in default. That's the truth. Our monitoring
how do you explain the reluctance of some of the state governors?
As we speak,
let's say some of the state governments.
Yes, I can tell you that as we speak, only 12 states have queued into the fiscal responsibility law at the state. Even at that, out of that 12, you have only about 10 that have set up their agencies. If you, like some of the states' fiscal responsibility agencies, they'll be here tomorrow as we're launching this. We've been engaging them. They do come. We train them. However, you still find out that out of that, if you look at their mode of operation, is not what it should be. Very few states. I can tell you.
Let's get your thoughts on this, and how much of a concern is this to macroeconomic management for the country?
Yeah, we have a tension in the sense that we have a federation which defines the limits of the powers shared by the states and the federal government. But like he did say, it's one economy. We can't afford free riders while others are making progress. Some other people are retrogressing, because at the end of the day, it's one economy, one currency, one market. So whatever somebody is doing somewhere will have a direct impact on everybody at the end of the day. But let me say this. If you want to measure how fiscally responsible a state government is, I want to link it up directly or indirectly to the strength of the demand by society, by the populace in that particular state, about fairness, about prudence. In most of these states, they don't have a strong state house of assembly that's trying to control the governor. The governor rather controls the state houses of assembly, quite unlike the federal states. And you also don't have the strength of civil society organizations and media focused on their budget and looking at what has been done and what has not been done. So essentially, we have more obedience in the breach at the state level. That's my thinking. Because we still have many states of the federation, where they have debts that are today not sustainable. Because people are borrowing short-term funds from banks at 20-15% to do long-term gestation projects in education and health, which brings a fiscal mismatch at the end of the day. Some states cannot pay salaries if not for these bailout funds that they were given. And there were 22 action points that the Minister of Finance gave to them. And if you look at, we did a study about how these things have been implemented, and you see that most of these things, people just, told the government that we've done this so that they can pick the money. In actual fact, not much had been done. And this brings me back to the issue of benchmarking, because at some point in time, the federal government was doing benchmarking through the National Planning Commission. And fiscal responsibility, procurement reforms, all of these were in that package. So if it is possible to bring back that collaboration between the federal government and the states, a benchmarking exercise which looks at these things, scores the states, and makes it public so that there will even be political pressure to say, oh, state A is performing and state B is not performing. Some form of naming, and not just naming and shaming. You know, states will now go back and now begin to work harder to make sure that they are among the performing states. Because at the end of the day, even if the political opponents may use it to say you did not do well, right?
So from okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, if you look at Lagos, Lagos was so successful in their IGR, and they had to blow the trumpet. Why was they getting 70% of their IGR? Their IGR was 70% of what they get from Abuja. It was such a success, and the gap was so wide that federal government actually now had to learn from the from Lagos state government. So you need to raise the profile of whoever has done a good job, so that people will learn from it and put enormous pressure on non-compliance. That is pressure. Social pressure will give us more results than heading to the court and then asking Attorney General to do what he probably will not even think of doing. So, connecting it, benchmarking, and then make sure, spend a little resource in letting people see why they have done well because of what they have done. Others will follow. And that's what is happening now on revenue collection. Everybody wants to copy Lagos. And the federal government, see what's happening with inland revenue, the FIRS now, 6 different mode bottle everywhere. It's all gone nuclear. So you could see the revenue coming, projecting revenue from 4 trillion to 6 trillion.
The proper forum for engaging the subnational governments would be obviously the National Economic Council. How regularly does the National Economic Council request the advisory of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission?
Well, we are yet to receive any such opinion or advice, request for advice. But the truth is that the Commission as a body and then collaboration with a civil society group, coincidentally Center for Social Justice, we have tried to set up a Council of Fiscal Responsibility of states with the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. We made a very good attempt at that. We are trying to sustain it, but we're also challenged logistically because there's no appropriation head for the commission to pursue that, because you have to look at it. But for some efforts of Center for Social Justice, particularly in organizing the states, we brought them together. What we now do as a commission is that from time to time, like tomorrow, we're going to have a meeting with them. A lot of the state chairmen of fiscal responsibility agencies or commissions, as they call them in some states, they're already calling it. They're going to come. By the time they come, we'll have meetings. We'll be struggling to see how we can get them, galvanize them into a body that. But also, there's a challenge in it. You find out a situation where in some states, I can give you 10 states, that their laws have been passed, the governor refused to sign. Yes. And some of these states, even some states that the governors have signed, they'll be dropped. The commission have not been set up. There's an institutional problem at that. And because of the federation, you can't delve directly. You keep nudging and urging them.
Well, an incentive scheme could be created. I mean, a part of what Prof and Eze have talked about, an incentive scheme could be created by which states that are largely compliant with the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act or Fiscal Responsibility Law get certain benefits or get certain federal assistance, XYZ, maybe access to soft loans or access to freebies, depending on what is that possible.
Actually, that is what those 22 action points are supposed to achieve. But the monitoring of that 22 action point is a different thing altogether. He stated it's obvious. States will
Who was supposed to oversight the 22 action points?
Well, the monitoring is not domiciled with Fiscal Responsibility Commission.
All right.
I think from all indications, from all I've learned this morning, it does appear that the states are not obligated to adhere to with the federation, and that's a problem. We recall that A couple of months ago, the government of Kaduna State sourced for external funds that was not approved by the National Assembly. And this is because from the question Kisley actually asked, there's no synergy when it comes to the economic approach, or sustenance in this country. As I said, he said one currency, one economy. Then why do we still have disparities, in terms of how to coordinate funds management and what have you? And it's very painful. But what is the way out?
Well, that question you asked, you remember that the states are seeking for more autonomy. I mean, the idea is that decentralize, remove most of the powers from the federal government. So it's more or less like you are going back to what is the political opinion, general consensus. The way out is that we must build political capital, political will to implement the law. Because even if you talk of sanctions, I don't see the Attorney General going to prosecute another minister, assuming you find out in the commission that Minister X is violating the law. And then Attorney General is also a minister. So you come to chambers after the Wednesday council meeting, you send men from your office to go and serve a summons to appear before a court to answer criminal charges on another minister. That cannot happen. I don't see it happening. So there must be another way of implementing it in terms of strong political will from the top. Until we build that, we are not going to have so much leeway. Criminal sanctions may be difficult to pursue in this kind of situation unless we have a neutral body that will pursue these things, unless the powers are vested in the commission and the appointment procedure to the commission becomes such a way that you get very extremely credible persons who can say, well, if I finish doing this and you sack me or I get out of this place, I don't care, but let the law be enforced, the heavens may fall.
All right, thank you very much. Let's take our last set of tweets from our viewers who have sent in their comments. That Dele Jack Solomon has this tweet: enthroning the regime of transparent and accountable financial management should be the framework for political office holders in Nigeria. They must all resolve to make fiscal responsibility work by following due process and shunning corrupt practices.
All right, from Victor Ohio Sumo, my question is, why is the Federal Executive Council still awarding contracts when the Act created the Fiscal Responsibility Council that is supposed to award same? And why is the council not constituted?
Now, Akins, I think that's a mix-up, by the way, from Victor. Yes, I think it's mixing it up.
Okay.
So the Fiscal Responsibility Commission doesn't award
contract. Exactly.
Yes.
That's right. I was
so,
actually
that should be BPP. That's Bureau of Public. The BPP doesn't award contracts either. It's right. It advises, it counsels, and then issues a certificate or approves.
And I hope Victor will have had this. You have had this. Okay. So.
Akins says whether fiscal or monetary responsibility, I'm sure that the Treasury Single Account Initiative has helped the economy tremendously.
All right, now, Jack Solomon says fiscal policy has long-run effects on the health of our economy, particularly through its impact on national savings and the growth of productivity. National savings has been generated privately by households and businesses or publicly by government. This the government must continue to sustain.
Now, Cecilia Okoroma has this way: there's too much impunity in Nigeria. Public office holders who commit crimes are rarely punished. So the commission, that's the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, might not achieve a lot.
Now, at this point, gentlemen, final thoughts, briefly, Professor Ife.
Well, the last comment is actually apt because we had Chief Eze talking about the difficulty of Attorney General issuing summons on a minister on the same cabinet. But some of the chairmen of some of the corporations and MDAs are far more powerful than their ministers, their supervising ministers. So you can even imagine trying to attack one of those chairmen of those MDAs and how you have, vicious calls coming from the presidency on you. So, there are limits to what you can achieve, using those formal conduits. But there are other things that you can do when you look at the two other things that we suggested about how to put pressure on them and how to bring it to the public domain and how to promote best practice and reward and recognize where people have done well.
All right. Professor Kerife, thanks a lot. Now, the new template for managing surpluses and therefore for better proper accounting of MDAs is something that speaks to the heart of corporate governance. There is a training program that the acting chairman has said is also coming afoot. What would you suggest in terms of expanding the scope of the trainees? Is it just the operatives who are in the system, the managers, or to also go to the board level? Because in corporate governance, as you very well know, it is the board that bears liability or responsibility for the malfeasance in the respective organizations. The chairmen and directors, do they recognize the liability of directors?
Very well, the operatives should be trained, and like you did point out, those who bear the legal responsibility for the corporation, the board members, the chairman should also be trained. And I even want to widen it. The civil society, the media should be trained to understand these things so that by the time you understand it and you yourself, you are reading a report or something, you can see where the flaws are and raise them up so much on your own. So operatives trained, board trained, and the society that should hold these people accountable should also be trained so that you build pressure from the bottom up.
Thanks a lot. Bishop Victor Morocco, your last words on this conversation.
Thank you very much. It is our hope at Fiscal Responsibility Commission that we'll continue to disseminate standard practice that will ensure better accountability in management of public resources, particularly by bringing out such templates like that of operating surplus that will encourage MDAs to remit more funds to the consolidated revenue fund so that the federal government will continue to implement its policies. We also look forward that in a very short distance of time, we'll be able to come up with a national template on a medium-term expenditure framework, which I know will help the appropriation life of the nation. Thank you.
Before you go, there are reports that most of the scheduled corporations under the 2007 Act are avoiding declaration of surplus. Is that true?
Yes, very well. We've been having that challenges. Those are the obvious challenges. We had to battle one particular agency that we had to recover over 22.6 billion in one fell swoop.
Right.
Yes, okay. And that is in arrears. We are still looking at some of their papers. We've not even gotten up to 213 or 214. A lot of them are like that. We are still working on them, and we'll make sure that these funds are recovered.
All right, gentlemen, would like to thank you. But assuming there's some challenge with the sanctions regime, isn't it possible? I mean, you're a lawyer. Isn't it possible, to look into the statute books and see some other potential offences that have been committed with regard to public funds? I mean, if they start that money somewhere, 22 billion somewhere, somebody was in charge. Was the money yielding interest? Were they moving it around? Anyway, those are issues that fiscal responsibility has to deal with. But that's the most that we can take. We'd like to thank our guests, three of them here with us. Ezo Yekpere, Lead Director, Center for Social Justice. Always a pleasure having you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
We also would like to thank Professor Kerife, Macro Economic Policy Analyst. Always a pleasure having you on Good Morning Nigeria. And Acting Chairman, Fiscal Responsibility Commission, Victor Morocco. Thanks a lot for being around with us.
Thank you. Nice being here. Thank you.
All right. So that does it for our conversation. Let's go over now to our sports desk.
One of the most elegant and versatile forms of entertainment associated with human body performance. Acrobats showcases incredible, impressive feats of strength, agility, and flexibility. Style of acrobatics lends itself more easily to certain genres. Acrobatic dance, pole artist with hand-to-hand acro-balance, particularly suited to captivate the audience at this gala night of the recently concluded 4th Forum on China-Africa Media Corporation and 8th Africa Digital TV Development Seminar in Belgium, China. Quite intriguing and exciting, right? But please, I urge you not to try the stunts at home.
Kingsley, that's a marvelous performance, you know, balance, human strength exhibited stylishly and very interesting. All right, now let's go to the Meteorological Agency for weather outlook for the rest of today. That's Good Morning Nigeria for today. We thank you for investing your time with us. We'll do that again tomorrow, but I will see you on Thursday.
I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kieran in thanking you for being with us today. As he said, the program returns tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy the rest of your day.